Okay, I think we're ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you. Welcome to the first of our ICCA Bar Course webinars. It's a pleasure to see you. This first one, of course, being on understanding bar training and the Inns of Court College of Advocacy approach to becoming a barrister. I'd like to introduce my colleagues. First of all, as you can see, I'm not going to say to my left or to my right because I know it changes according to what you're looking at this on. But first of all, you can see certainly at my top, Jane Hutton.
Hello.
Jane is one of our directors of online learning and one of the brains behind the Part 1 course, which you're going to hear about in due course. To my right, probably to your left or somewhere else, is Patrick Ryan, who is the other director of online learning, again, one of the brains behind that. And then I can see below to my left, but again, probably somewhere else for you, Rachel Hondora. And Rachel is an alumna of the Inns of Court College of Advocacy. She's been through both the Part 1 and the Part 2 course successfully, I hasten to add, and she's currently working with us actually to help us improve the course and check that everything is up to date for all the future generations of students that are coming through. So welcome to you, Rachel, because I think this is one of the first, it is the first webinar that you've done with us.
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right. What we're going to do today is really bring to life for you what the ICCA Bar Course is all about. Let me just say, you can see below you, below the screen, I should say, a Q&A function. There's a chat function and a Q&A function. If I can ask you to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function, and what we will do is we will monitor that as we go and find convenient places throughout the next hour to answer your questions as much as we can. Let me say that sometimes there are complex admissions questions. And if you have a tricky admissions question, I will be more than happy to answer that, but essentially at another time. So if you email admissions@icca.ac.uk, that will come through to me and I'll be able to deal with your query direct. Okay, so please don't feel by the end of this, if you haven't had your question answered, that we won't get to you, because we'd be delighted to. Let me just start off, if I may, with a sort of general guide, if you like, to bar training. There are three stages of training to become a barrister. The first is called the academic stage. That's where a number of you will be now, which is doing your undergraduate degree. A number of you may have already secured your degree. A lot of career changes come onto the bar course, so you may have done your degree some time ago. But that's the academic stage. You then move on to what's called the vocational stage. That is the bar course stage. That's the stage that we're dealing with that. Bar courses go by multiple names, much to everyone's irritation. It used to be called the BPTC, the Bar Professional Training Course. I think there's still a provider. There's 10 providers of bar training. One of them still, I think, chooses to go by that name. We go by simply the bar course, the ICCA Bar Course. Others call it the bar training course. Some call it bar vocational training course. But fundamentally, they lead to the same thing, which essentially is getting you called to the bar and getting into pupillage, hopefully, of course. And then pupillage is that third stage. It's the professional stage. It's where you essentially do your pupillage, which is, to all intents and purposes, an apprenticeship. Normally break down into 2 sixes. The first 6 spent with your pupil supervisor and multiple other barristers within chambers, learning the trade in terms of conference, going to court, working on papers, you name it. And then, of course, in your second 6, actually getting a provisional practicing certificate and going to court yourself. That's the scary bit we all remember. I certainly do. I remember going off down to the magistrate's court, for that was my first hearing, and my pupil master screaming out the window to me, don't forget to put your case. That was his advice to me as I strolled off down the road to what was Leicester Magistrates Court. That was where my first case was. Lovely Leicester Mags, as we used to call it. Okay, so that essentially are the stages. Now, when you look at bar training courses, all of them have to follow some fundamental subjects, some key modules, and they are set out in what is called the Curriculum and Assessment Strategy, which is a Bar Standards Board document, because the Bar Standards Board are the independent regulator for barristers and also for barristers' education at the vocational stage and indeed thereafter. What that means is that whenever you look at a bar course, there will be a common theme. The common theme is that you will be learning advocacy in 3 parts: submissions advocacy, witness handling, which is examination in chief and cross-examination. You'll be doing opinion writing and drafting. You'll be doing legal research. And you will be also doing professional ethics at a foundational level, because these days, don't scream at me, it's not my fault, it's the BSB's fault. You have to do professional ethics also in pupillage. There's a separate course. You'll be delighted to hear that actually we provide an awful lot of materials to help you with that. But nonetheless, that's the way professional ethics works. So when you look at a bar training course, because you see those common subjects, it's quite easy to think, and you'd be forgiven for thinking, that that means all bar training courses are the same. But they are far from the same. They're very, very different. And here at the Inns of Court College of Advocacy, we decided to take a different approach to bar training, an approach that we felt would actually really assist our students, not just in terms of getting through the course and getting a qualification, but getting a qualification that was going to be of considerable worth to them when they actually moved on. I think we've all been in that situation where you've done an exam, you think, oh, thank goodness for that, I don't need to remember any of that stuff again. We want you to remember it because we want it to actually be useful to you, and essentially to provide a course that's not only directly relevant to practice, but is respected by practitioners, i.e. by practicing barristers, as being directly relevant to practice, and therefore essentially getting the quality mark from the bar itself, and therefore having a respected bar course makes all the difference. You're going to hear about a number of successes that we've had, but what I'm going to start off by doing is I'm going to ask Jane to take us through part 1 of the course. As I said, Jane is one of the brains behind actually putting what was quite an extraordinary new concept together. So Jane, explain part 1. How does it work?
Okay, so we are, I think I'm right in saying, Chris, we are now the only provider which splits the course into these 2 distinct parts of part 1 and part 2. And part 1 covers what we call the knowledge subjects. So in order to successfully complete the bar training course, you have to understand the rules of litigation, evidence, sentencing, ADR, all of these things that underpin what actually happens when you go to court. And our part 1 course covers those knowledge subjects. And we separated it out from the skills subjects for 3 main reasons fundamentally. So what we wanted to look at was trying to reduce cost for students, trying to reduce risk for students, and trying to increase flexibility. And what the part 1 course does is it means that you only commit yourself to that part 1, to getting through the BSB centralised assessments in those knowledge subjects. And that is all you're committed to at that stage. And it's only if you are successful in those assessments that you are able to progress onto part 2, which Patrick will tell you about in a moment. But also, more importantly, it's only then that you're liable to pay for the bigger course fees for part 2. So that was the rationale behind it. But then obviously we had to put it into practice. So how do we deliver this part 1 course? Well, we deliver it completely online. Now, by that, I don't mean like the kind of online lectures you may have endured, shall I say, during COVID. We don't just put lessons online where you're sitting in a Zoom classroom like this one, listening to somebody bang on about criminal litigation or civil evidence or something like that. What we actually do is we have designed a completely asynchronous bespoke online course for you. Asynchronous means doesn't have any timetable sessions. You study it at your own pace, at your own speed, and you work through the materials at your own pace. Now, what's in the course then? So there's a lot of reading to do for the Part 1 course, and we cover all of that and we test your understanding of all of that. We've got interesting activities, we've got online quizzes, but what we also try and do is make it as practical and comprehensible for you as possible, so you can actually apply those rules in real life situations, which will really help you when you move on to Part 2 and on to practice, but also more importantly, will help you with those quite hard BSB centralised assessments, which are multiple choice based, but they do require a lot of application and understanding of the rules. So in order to bring everything to life and to put it into that practical context, we include a lot of actual courtroom films, which were filmed in real courtrooms. And we also include lots of conference films. So that's discussions between barristers and their clients. And that helps you to understand how those rules we're teaching you in theory actually apply in practice and how they apply to the facts of a real case. Now, the other thing, of course, when you're studying by yourself online is you have to decide when you're ready to take the BSB assessments. So again, the flexibility that the course allows means that you don't have to take them at the first opportunity, although we do have a recommended pathway through the course where you have between 12 and 14 weeks to complete Part 1. But it's up to you to decide, yes, put my hands up, I'm ready to take those BSB assessments. There are 3 opportunities throughout the year for you to take those assessments. So depending upon when you start our course, which I suspect is something Chris might come back to later, you can take those assessments in December, in April, or in August. And how do you test yourself and decide whether you're ready? Well, we have hundreds of formative questions. They were definitely the most fun part for Patrick and I to put together of the course, not at all. And you will be able to test yourself using realistic exam style questions throughout the course, and also at the end. The BSB provide a mock assessment. That wasn't enough for us, so we've written an entire additional mock assessment in both subjects, so you're able to see exactly where you're at before you decide to take those assessments. Okay, Chris, how much more detail would you like me to go into? Is that sufficient on the course?
No, that's really helpful, but there's one part that really jumps out. I think I'll ask Rachel about this, but it really is the films that you and Patrick put together, because for those of you that may be concerned about the whole idea of not actually having a tutor standing in front of you, in many ways, when you're teaching criminal litigation or civil litigation, this isn't academic law you're learning, it's procedural law, much of it. So, for example, you might be learning in a bad character application, you're reading the law about it and the procedure about it, but you might be thinking, well, what does that look like in court? And the really interesting thing about, or what we decided to do, I say we, I mean Patrick and Jane, is actually bring that to life by going into and filming in the Rolls building, filming the Royal Courts of Justice, into Blackfriars Crown Court.
Yeah.
And it did that in a really interesting way. And you can explain that, Jane, far better than I, actually, how that works.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we've both been involved in more traditional style bar courses before, and you often get example films in all bar courses, not just in ours, but they're often done in a slightly amateurish way, not wanting to, I myself have been in a room with a barrister and a video camera with a bit of wrapping paper that looks like books stuck on the wall behind us. We're talking that level of filming. We decided that we needed something slightly higher quality and perhaps a bit more realistic in order to teach you if you're going to be online and you don't have availability to talk to practitioners in the classroom. But we didn't want to make it entirely scripted, entirely Patrick and my voice as barristers, because each individual practitioner has their own individual style. And we wanted to incorporate as many of those different styles as possible. So what we did is we designed the briefs. There are 3 briefs that run through the criminal course. There are 4 briefs that run through the civil course. And in those, we decided which learning points we wanted to cover, which areas of the course we wanted to cover. We then went and actually briefed real life practitioners. So we sent them the papers exactly as we would have done if they were preparing those cases for real life conferences and real life court hearings. And we then went along and audio recorded what they would do in real life if they were dealing with those cases. From those audio recordings, we were able to then turn them into scripts for the actual films, which we then got a professional film company who actually make dramatic proper films. And we also employed proper actors, and they came in and recorded all of those. And I think that when we get feedback on the Part 1 course, those films are often mentioned as being the most enjoyable, but also some of the most useful parts of the course. And they're often described, we're quite proud of this, as the legal dramas rather than the boring educational films that you might think that you would come to expect on that kind of course. So Rachel can either confirm or deny that for us, but we do think that they're perhaps one of the more successful parts of the Part 1 course.
Thanks, Jane. I was going to say, over to you now, Rachel. Can you confirm or deny? How did you find the well, let's just focus first of all on those films on the Part 1 course. Were they of assistance to you?
Yes, they were. I think they helped, especially in helping me to understand and apply how different procedures work depending on what hearing or trial it is. And to be honest, given that most of Part 1 was mainly reading, it was good to have that form of entertainment, or just, like as Jane said, legal drama. So yeah, I found them very, very useful and very enjoyable. And the nice thing as well is they're available for you to watch in Part 2 if you wanted maybe a refresher. So yeah.
And we'll hear about Part 2 in a moment from Patrick, but it's absolutely right that of course one of the benefits here is that you get essentially your centrally set bar standards board assessments out of the way before you move on to the skills subjects, the advocacy, the conference skills, etc. But how much do you actually refer back to those materials when you're on Part 2 of the course?
A lot. For some modules more than others. For example, with conference, you always have to go back to your Part 1, your criminal litigation, and with submissions advocacy as well. There's a lot of going back to the civil litigation in order to apply the rules and the procedures into your advocacy, basically. So having that and having the information from Part 1 still available, the resources as well, was incredibly helpful, because then you didn't have to take up too much of your time going back to investigate or research, because the material's already readily available for you.
That's really helpful. Some students that and career changers that are thinking of doing our course may be concerned not having had experience of a course like this, an online course like this on Part 1. They may be concerned, will they be at a disadvantage by not having a tutor that they can call on a daily basis? Can you give us your experience, Rachel, of what it was like learning in that particular way, and how the course, the way it was put together, assisted you in actually ensuring that you reach the standards required of you in order to take the assessments?
So I actually did Part 1 of the course over a year-long period, and that is because I was working full-time. So as Chris mentioned earlier, one of the benefits is one of the benefits of this course is it allows you flexibility, which means that students who are working or have childcare responsibilities are able to undertake this course and not having to worry so much about that part of their learning. So I did it over 12 months. And what I really, really enjoyed is the fact that the course is tailored in a way that is basically like it guides you through the syllabus itself. So the information and everything you have available to you is not just presented to you as here's the syllabus, go through it and learn it, but instead it's broken down into units and subjects that allow you to basically frame your learning in a way that's more beneficial for you, or in a way that you understand the most. So if, for example, you're doing it, you're going to be taking it in, studying it in a year, as I did, the fact that the syllabus is broken down into units and subjects means that you can do, for example, 1 unit each month, or depending on how quickly you want to do it. So it's very, very helpful that you have that tailored form of learning, because if you decided to take a break because you have something that's come up as well, it means that you have an understanding, or you sort of know where you left off and pick it up from there. So the fact that it's broken down into pieces was very, very helpful. And the additional resources that you have, for example, like the quizzes as well. So for example, when you do a quiz, you're able to see where you left off, or during revision periods, you're able to see which questions you struggled with because you would have gotten them wrong, or in several attempts, there's a specific question you got wrong many times. That way you're able to be like, okay, when I'm doing my revision, I can see exactly where I went wrong. I can see exactly what I need to focus on. So the fact that it's very tailored was very, very helpful for me. And I had never imagined myself almost tutoring myself, but the fact that there were so many resources available and also having a certain level of discipline helped me to get through the course.
Yeah, I think discipline, timekeeping is important, isn't
Yes.
it? I mean, being careful about how you actually manage your time management as opposed to timekeeping. That's really helpful. Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to sing the praises of Jane, Patrick, and indeed Rachel, because the fact is that this course works exceptionally well. In fact, the first cohort that came through during the Part 1 course, 100% passed. It was really unheard of that's ever happened. And since that time, a few people have fallen by the wayside, but picked up. Remember, you can retake if it doesn't always work, but we are a significant distance ahead of any other bar training provider. You don't need to take my word for it. You can take the word for it, in fact, of the chair of the Bar Standards Board Central Examinations Board, who writes this in his independent report, the last of which was 6th of July 2023. He says, the ICCA has the highest average passing rate across both litigation subjects and all sittings to date. The ICCA is thus far some way ahead of other AETA centres, i.e. bar course providers, in terms of cohort performance. So we know this works really well. Let me just say, before we move on, something else. That some people are concerned that they might be working in isolation because it's an online course. But what we do is, first of all, we, as long as, of course, you're happy for us to do that, pass your contact details to other students. So we get these WhatsApp groups that develop. And we know from experience that a lot of people who arrive on Part 2, and you're going to hear about Part 2 shortly, when they arrive on Part 2, a lot of friendship groups and contacts have been made. Now, of course, geographically, you could take Part 1 from anywhere in the world. So some people will find themselves geographically close, and they may well meet up themselves during Part 1. Other people won't, but certainly there's a lot of contact. I think it's right, Patrick. In fact, if I pass over to you, that even though we don't provide a personal tutor for academic work on Part 1, we do put on revision webinars and those sort of things, don't we?
We do. There's a revision webinar for both the criminal exam and the civil exam at the end, just before each set of assessments. That's normally about a fortnight before. We also try to stay in contact with you in other ways as well on Part 1. Jane and I host what is laughingly referred to as the Directors of Online Learning Coffee Morning a couple of times a term, which is just an opportunity for anyone to log into a Zoom call like this and come and have a chat to us about what's going on. And importantly, to talk to each other about what's going on as well, because as Chris said, one of the things that can happen is it can feel a little isolating, and the things that we can do and that you can do to talk to each other and form a kind of band together. And that happens, as Chris said, geographically. It also happens by in. So I know that the Gray's Inn Part 1 students had a meeting in a pub in Pimlico. It's very Gray's Inn. A couple of Fridays ago, they all met up there, those who were within striking distance of pubs in Pimlico. So by geographical location, I suspect also by reference to people who knew each other previously at university or come from the same institution as well. So there are lots of ways of getting together and lots of ways of staying in contact. And I should just say, as Jane rightly said, it's an asynchronous course, so you don't have a tutor-led timetable. But as Rachel knows, because Jane and I make her do this job every Friday, we create forums for you to post questions to us about the course. And once a week, we'll go through all of the forums And sometimes we find that you've answered each other's questions, which is brilliant, because if you can answer each other's questions, then you're highly likely to be able to answer the BSB's questions when it comes to the exam. But where there isn't an answer from a student, we will provide an answer for you as well. So please don't go away thinking, oh, they're going to send me the books and send me a login code for a website, and then I won't see anybody until part 2. That's not quite how it happens. But also, please don't go away thinking I'm going to have a weekly meeting with my personal tutor for an hour, because that's not how it happens either. It's somewhere in the middle of all that.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, so that is part 1 of the course. Remember, of course, part 1 can commence in either start in September or it can start in January. So if you're applying for the ICCA Bar Course during the application process, the window is open now until the 15th of January. You can ask to start either in September of 24 or January of 2025. As Rachel has said, she took the what I call the flexible route. So she took up to a year to do the course. You can do it in a far more confined space if you like. You can do it over 12 to 14 weeks following the guided pathway. So you could, if you started, for example, in September, you take your first set of exams in December, ready for part 2 starting in March the following year. Or there are, as Jane said earlier, you could take, rather than taking exams in December, you could take them in April. That's the next sitting, or indeed in August, which I'm assuming is what you did, Rachel. So it's essentially, there's a real flexibility in that course. As Rachel has said, for people who've got work commitments, you can work alongside it, or family commitments, or indeed any caring commitments. It's worth saying there are people who have done it over 12 to 14 weeks who've worked full time, but that is extremely rare. We would not recommend it because that really is pushing it. There was one lady who did it during lockdown because, as she said, well, you couldn't go out anyway, so that worked. There was someone else who did it outside lockdown and did extraordinarily well. But it's not an approach we would take. I'm saying that because we always get questions about it. I would say if you are working, take the more flexible approach, do it in your own time, because of course your well-being is really important to us, and it should be to all of us. And that's really a good lesson to learn as you move through the bar generally. Okay, so let's hand over to Patrick now. And you've now wonderfully finished part 1. You've passed all your exams. That's brilliant. And now you are coming to join us on part 2 of the bar course. What's going to happen? What will that look like, Patrick?
Thanks, Chris. We'll take you through part 2. Just to say, in terms of your start to part 2, as Rachel talked about the flexibility offered by part 1 and when you take your exams, equally, within reason and within your own personal timetable for when you might want to start pupillage, you have a choice about when you start part 2 as well. You don't have to immediately go from part 1 to part 2. Some people we know like to step off, have a short break, perhaps earn some money working full-time before they begin the part 2 course. So the ICCA course is as flexible as we can make it all the way through, including the start of part 2. But part 2 is very different to part 1. You will be meeting in person with your colleagues and with tutors 4 days a week. We teach part 2 from Monday to Thursday, most weeks Monday to Thursday. Occasionally, if there's a bank holiday, we go Tuesday to Friday. But crucially, you will be within the precincts of the Inns of Court. The Inns, by way of the ICCA, made a huge investment in the ICCA Bar Course, both in terms of getting it off the ground and having the course designed and delivered, but also in terms of the geographical resources they make available to you as an ICCA student. So the current cohort on part 2 are currently down at Middle Temple. Rachel, I think you were at Gray's Inn and Lincoln's for your part 2, is that right? The cohort that starts in March of next year will be back at Lincoln's and Gray's, and then we alternate between Middle and Inner Temple. And what that means is that each and every one of the 4 inns have invested in bespoke classrooms and bespoke teaching areas for you as ICCA students. And that puts you uniquely as bar students right at the heart of legal London. If you go to luncheon hall at any of the inns, you will be sitting next to and along the table from judges and practitioners who have come from court that morning and are going back to court that afternoon. It's a really unique opportunity to study at the heart of the Inns of Court, which hasn't been available to bar students for a long time. Part 2, as many of you will know, you've done the knowledge on Part 1 in terms of criminal and civil litigation. Part 2 is the skills subject. So it's what we might think of as the more fun side of bar training, although Rachel will correct me if I'm wrong about that in due course. It's the advocacy, it's the conferencing, it's learning to write legal opinions in both opinion writing and indeed in drafting statements of case. There's also, because Jane and I are involved, there's some online learning as well. So your professional ethics course is taught wholly online, but everything else is taught face-to-face. That split between knowledge and skills allows you to change your focus in Part 2 from you having accumulated all that knowledge of the procedure rules, as Chris said, and the law of evidence. You then get to apply it and develop your skills, particularly as an advocate. We know that's why most of you are wanting to come to the bar, to develop that side of your skill set. And so our focus in Part 2 is on developing those skills and equipping you, crucially, for what's coming in pupillage in a short period of time for many of you. That's the focus of Part 2, is getting you ready to make that move from being academic lawyers, which you've all been up until now, to becoming professional lawyers by way of the Part 2 course and then ultimately pupillage. The course runs for 17 or 19 weeks, depending on which cycle you choose. I know Chris will talk more about cycles, but the March course is March to July course is slightly shorter, just to get you out the door in time for graduation and the start of pupillages in September and October. And we are dedicated, as we are on Part 1, to the highest educational standards. The people who will be teaching you are people who have many, many years of professional experience in court and many years as professional educators as well. One of the advantages of being the ICCA is that not only do we have a staff of really, really highly qualified tutors, but we're able to call upon practicing members of the profession to come and teach as well. And they do so, they're delighted to do so. And it brings an entirely, a perspective that is entirely up to the moment. You will be taught by people who have done the kinds of things you're learning to do in the week or 2 weeks before they're teaching you. So it's a really valuable resource. The Bar Course leader was telling me at the end of last week that in March of next year, I think 2 silks are giving up time in their diaries, not because we pay them the same they'd be able to earn in real life, you understand, but because they are dedicated to the future of the profession. They want to come and teach on the ICCA Bar Course, along with practitioners who are in court day to day as well. As Chris has already said, the clue to what we focus on is in our name. We are the Inns of Court College of Advocacy, and advocacy skills are very much at the heart of what you learn on Part 2. And that really involves everything from the various early applications you might make in the magistrates' courts, with Chris remembering to put his client's case, as somebody shouted out the window after him, all the way up to appellate work in the Court of Appeal and beyond. We want to prepare you for whatever pupillage might throw at you. And so, depending on what that is, we try to make the sessions as true to life as we can possibly make them. I know the civil course in particular has a whole session where what's going to happen remains a mystery to you almost until the moment where you walk into the classroom, to try and replicate the kind of things that can happen when you turn up on a county court judge's busy list and not really knowing what's about to take place. So we try to replicate real life practice as much as possible, not simply to prepare you for an advocacy exam. We will prepare you for an advocacy exam, but we will do so much more than that as well. While you're on Part 2, you can make use of the Inn's libraries. Each of the individual libraries is open to you within the Inn. So if you want a quiet place to study and to research, you've got that facility available to you as well. Each of the classrooms is kitted out with bespoke equipment so that we can video record your performances, particularly in conference and advocacy. And we do a big piece at the beginning of Part 2, trying to persuade people of the value of watching themselves back. You are going to be performers. If you come into the profession, whether it's as high-level commercial litigators or as Jane and Chris and I once were, jobbing criminal hacks, as they're kindly called, you will be a performer. And performers need to learn to watch themselves and to be comfortable watching themselves and listening to themselves. So we try to make that process as easy for you as possible. All your sessions will be video recorded and your feedback, and we massively encourage you to take advantage of that. You will improve your skills so much more quickly if you can bring yourself to watch back the videos that we make, that you will be making during part 2. We have, as I've already said, really strong links to the profession. I don't think I need to say a huge amount more about that, other than to say the list of speakers that the ICCA has already had come to talk to students in its relatively short history. The first iteration of this course began in September 2020, as I think Jane said. We've had Baroness Hale, Lord Justice Rabinder Singh, Dinah Rose KC, and a huge number of other hugely eminent people. It's a massive compliment to the ICCA that people of that caliber want to come and talk to you and be involved in your legal education. And it's something we're enormously proud of. We are dedicated at all stages of your career at the ICCA to your well-being. There is well-being support available both on part 1 and part 2. There are direct lines of communication to the bar course leader and to student support if you need anything at all from us in that regard while you're a part 2 student. We also have a careers and advice and support service, and Chris was kind enough to compliment Jane and I on part 1. It's a huge tribute to his work and his efforts that those materials are so useful, and that system is so brilliant. He told you about the pass rates for part 1. I think it's also right to say that very first cohort, Chris, I think, am I right saying 100% of that first cohort have pupillage 3 years out?
97%.
Oh, you see, I overcooked it by 3%. That's very always underplay rather than overplay. But all bar 1, I think, is the number of that cohort have obtained pupillage in the time since they graduated from the course. And if you come to the ICCA, as we hope many of you will, what you'll discover is that there are a range of people. There are some people who'll be further down the journey than others. There'll be some who arrive with pupillage who need very little by way of help from us in that regard. There'll be many, many more, though, who have either started looking for pupillage or want to start looking for pupillage. And the careers advice and support service that Chris has built is absolutely brilliant at helping people. One of the advantages we have, perhaps over other providers, is that this is all we do. We don't have an LPC or a SQE, as it's now delightfully called. We don't have a GDL. We don't offer undergraduate training in law. All we do is offer education to the profession and to those who want to enter the profession. So our career service is completely dedicated to those who are looking for pupillage or looking for work at the employed bar in England and Wales. Last 2 things that just from me to round off. One is some of you might be interested in the size of the groups you'll be learning in. So each of you will be, when you come to the ICCA, assigned to a tutor group on part 2 that numbers 12, but most of your classes will take place in smaller groups than that. Your advocacy will be in groups of 4, your conference in groups of 6, and that allows for a huge amount more time for the tutors to watch you, to listen to you, and to feedback and to offer bespoke feedback to you as individuals. And that's another huge strength that the ICCA Part 2 offers to you. I don't know, Chris, if there's anything else you want me to say. But
no, that's really helpful. But I just wanted to add actually that in terms of those small group sizes, we started as a provider of bar education. We kept it relatively small. But we are expanding significantly, and just to make it clear that despite the increasing numbers on our course, we will maintain those small class sizes and, of course, the quality of the tutors that are looking after you and guiding you down that path to pupillage. So, just want to be really, really clear about that. We in no way will we be diluting the quality of this course, even though we will be getting a lot more students. I want to pass on to the authentic voice of Rachel now, because I know that I'm not going to say anything about you that I know that a lot of our students, really a lot of students who want to do bar training, are driven by the will and the need to become advocates. How did you find advocacy on the Part 2 course, Rachel?
So I found it challenging, but also incredibly rewarding, because as Patrick mentioned earlier, it's not just about helping you to pass the course, and then you go and you go and apply the skills that you've learned in pupillage and further on in tenancy. But it's making sure that you have the skills and the technique that is required of you, so that when you start pupillage, you're not having to start learning from scratch because you've already gained those skills. So whilst it was incredibly challenging, I did appreciate that the tutors you have definitely want to see you achieve the best that you possibly can on the course. So the fact, as Patrick was mentioning, the sessions are recorded, which is very, very helpful, because over the course of, for example, for me, I did it from March till July. You have all that time to be able to see, okay, in session 1, this was my level of advocacy, and look how much I've improved by session 10 in criminal advocacy, for example. So having that was really, really helpful. But also you have, within your groups, you have access to some of your peers' recordings as well, which means that if you thought that your colleague's performance was very, very good, it means that you can go back and watch that as well, so that you can identify these were the weaknesses within my performance, this is what my colleague did well, and I can apply that to my own performance next time. So yeah, yes. Is there anything you wanted me to add to
Not
that?
at all. Let me ask you this: paint this picture for us. What was it like coming to learn on a course that I think for you, as Patrick was saying earlier, was in Lincoln's Inn and Gray's Inn? What did that feel like? What was the experience like for you?
I think because I had never been around the inn so much as I did during part 2 of the course, in a way, it makes you feel like you're in the right place. The environment itself, I think, sets the tone for part 2, so that you already feel like an advocate. And the way the tutors treat you as well, they don't treat you like a student, they treat you like somebody they're training who's already there, but then they're just adding in a bit of information, adding in feedback to make you the best possible advocate that you can be. So being around the inns as well just set the tone. It's almost like, yeah, it set the tone for the course itself, but also the nature of the profession that we're going into.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. The other thing I'd wanted to add, you heard Patrick talking about careers. Remember that careers advice, the careers hub that Patrick was referring to, that's available to you on both parts 1 and 2 of the course. Okay, so it's not as if that suddenly opens in terms of other lectures and extracurricular activities. Similarly, you have access to those both on parts 1 and part 2. Okay, so so once you get going on part 1, there's a lot that becomes available to you. Okay, let me move on. We've spoken a lot about course cycles, and this creates a lot of confusion, because essentially this course runs all the time in this particular way. You can start part 1, as you heard earlier, in September or in January. If you start it in September, for example, as I said, you could do over the guided pathway of 12 to 14 weeks, or you could take longer. Similarly, if you do it, so therefore you could take your first exams, start in September, take your exams in December. If you start in January, you could take your exams in April. Both of those, if you started in September, took your exams in December, you could start your part 2 course in March. If you started in January and took your exams in April, you could start your part 2 exams. Your part 2 exams, your part 2 course, I should say, in September. So there's a lot of flexibility around this. So essentially, part 1 starts September and January, and part 2 starts either in September or indeed in March. So the course is running along those lines, and the whole reason for that is essentially this concept of flexibility. How long do you want to take over your part 1? Do you want to do it over a short period of time and take the exams at the first opportunity available to you, or do you want to take longer? And if you take longer, we will fit you in to the next available part 2. When you're applying for the course, you can say which start you want, which part 1 start you want. Do you want to start in September? Do you want to start in January? With more students joining the course, we can't always guarantee that start date. But remember, if you have a requirement, such as you have a pupillage that's starting in September or October the following year, then we will start your course in a way that will enable you to start that pupillage. We're never going to stop that happening. But a lot of people, let's just take an example of what a lot of people might do. They might start their part 1 in September. They might take their exams in December. If they're successful, they can start their part 2 in March. That gap between December and March is really useful, because the pupillage gateway, which is where that's a Bar Council website where all of the pupillages are advertised. All the applications must be made between early January and early February each year. So that space is really useful, and we've heard a lot of feedback from our students that they're really happy with that. I'd love to say it was designed to do that. I'm not sure if that was just a lucky accident, but nonetheless, it was an extraordinarily lucky accident because it works well. It does mean that when you actually join the course in March, you'll probably have a lot of interviews to go to. Whatever course you're on anywhere, that's going to be the case. There's only so much we can do about that, but of course we'll work with you as best you can to facilitate that. That's fundamentally how course cycles work. If you're still confused, and you'd be forgiven for being confused, please go onto our website, look at the page called About the Bar Course. And what I've done there is I've put multiple scenarios. So you can actually work out, you can see exactly the various pathways you could take through this course to suit you best. Remember, let me say this. If you come along to the bar course, like many, many people, and you don't have pupillage, that's fine, okay? Let's say you apply, you do your course, you start your course in September, you take your exams in December, you apply for pupillage, and then you start your part 2 in March, and you finish in July. If you're successful in your pupillage application, your pupillage probably will not start in September of that year. It'll start in September, October of the following year. Okay, so normally your pupillage will start on the following year to the year you're applying. Not always, but usually. So really, whether you start your part 1 in September or January, practically for most people will make no difference. The difference it will make is where you already have a pupillage. If you join the course with a pupillage, and you'll probably have a start date, and therefore you will request, as you can during the application process, a specific start date, and we will be pleased to give that to you. I see a number of questions.
Sorry, could I? Yeah, I was going to say, perfect timing. Could I just jump in? We've had a couple of questions, but there's one specifically pertaining to start dates. So Vikita has asked, if you select a September start date only, would you be considered for a January start as well, or only September? So that's for part 1.
We will give preference to people who request a specific start date. But there is a box during the application process that says, I require a start date, and you have to say why you require it. Now, if you have a pupillage in the bag, as it were, starting September or October the following year, we will ensure that you get that September start date. If it's just a preference and not a requirement, we will do our best to assign you to that, but we can't guarantee it. What we do is we essentially get a group of people on a waiting list. If there are people that get for example, a January start date and say, actually, things have changed, I really want to get onto September. Again, we will always do what we can to ensure you get what you want, but we cannot at this stage guarantee it, except when it's an absolute requirement. I hope that answers the question.
Conversely, Chris, because this person is saying, well, what if I apply for September and I want to start in January instead? Am I right in thinking, because September tends to be our more popular start date for the reasons you've just outlined, that if somebody got offered a September start date but said, actually, it would suit me better to start in January, I can't really see a problem with somebody changing their mind and pushing their start date back if they need to.
No, and we do get people who get September, and again they change their mind. You're right. Initially, September was more popular. As we move through the course, we're finding that a lot of people are realising actually they quite fancy the January start, because there is no need. I think because people are used to that traditional way of we start a course in September, we finish in July or August. That's what I should do this time. Of course, we've sort of turned that around, and I think people are now actually thinking, yeah, do you know what? That might suit me. I quite fancy, for example, having the winter period and Christmas period off and doing no work for the first time in the last 10 years. So, you know, there's lots of flexibility in there. We'll work with you. But let me just say this, we will communicate with you during the whole process, okay? So we've never had a real problem arise out of this, but we will work with you. And if things change, of course, we will be happy to assist as best we can.
All right. We've got another question, which is about applications more generally. So Craig is getting straight to the heart of the matter. He's saying, my question is, approximately how many people apply for the ICCA Bar Course, and how many of those are offered places?
Okay.
Some success if you apply with us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay. Let me deal with that now. The reality is that we don't know how many people are going to apply this year. We know that our course we had an awful lot of applications last year, and we assume we're going to get the same this year, and probably more because of the success of our course and the respect it has from the profession in the ways that we've described. On our website, we believe in being as clear and transparent as we possibly can about what we're looking for in students, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. We put on our website the criteria that we use in order to measure all candidates or all applicants for places on the bar course. What we don't set are limits on numbers. We are getting to the stage where there will be a limit, of course, on the amount of candidates we will take, because there's only so many candidates you can take. However, please don't feel in some ways that we put artificial limits on numbers, and therefore we're saying, oh, there's X number of applicants and we're only going to allow Y number through. The reality is that for the reasons I've been explaining, if you start on part 1, a number of those people will take their exams at the first opportunity and go on to part 2, but a number will take far longer. So we don't really have to artificially limit the number of students we've got, because we know over time they will naturally move on to the part 2 course. So the flexibility really works, I think, advantageously for our students. But let me just put that off for a moment, because I'm going to come back to applications. We've got 8 minutes left, so I just want to deal with fees, because fees are important, of course. We're a not-for-profit organisation, unlike a number of other bar course providers. It's not for me to start beating down the competition, and I'm not going to. I would suggest to anyone that's considering bar training to look at the provision and look at the results and the success rates of all bar training providers before they make a final decision. But however, what we seek to do is to provide bar training at the highest level at the lowest sustainable cost. Our bar course costs £3,934 for part 1. That includes all of the books, the BSB levy, which is a requirement wherever you do your bar training, you'd have to pay. Therefore, it includes everything you need. It doesn't include, of course, accommodation. We totally get this as an expensive business. Therefore, it's important that you get as much out of this as you can. You do not have to pay anything towards part 2 unless and until you start part 2. And part 2 comes in at £11,801. Again, including the BSB levy and all the resources you need to complete that, you know, Westlaw, LexisNexis, etc. So the total combined fee for part 1 and part 2 is £15,735. As I say, you don't have to pay for part 2 unless you start it. If, for example, you know, life sometimes throws things at us. Let's say you do part 1, but then for various reasons you don't have the ability to move on and do part 2. You wouldn't be charged anything for it. You wouldn't be under any contractual obligation to pay for it, because that's what we meant when Patrick was talking earlier about reducing the risk, the financial risk for students. We take that really seriously. We don't take a deposit off you. When you're on part 2, there are flexible payment options. We'll do what we can to help you. Funding, of course, is important for students. We get that. Remember, the Inns provide over £5 million worth of scholarships, both to graduate diploma in law, GDL students and bar students. Let me stress this. If you're starting your bar training next year, you need to make that application by the 3rd of November for any inn you're applying to. That deadline is looming. So please get that application in. It's not for me to say which one to apply to. All of the inns are wonderful. Choose the one that suits you best. They've all got, you know, a certain ethos. Architecturally, of course, they're different and similar at the same time, but they are these beautiful oases in the centre of legal London. And I would say to any of you that haven't experienced them, please come over. They all run their own open days, online and indeed in person. So get to know them. We don't do an LLM option, which allows you to get a government loan from £12,100 to up to £12,167. That there's a number of reasons behind that. The LLM option we would do would be with King's. We've priced that up. It would be so expensive to get a course of that quality. It wouldn't really help you doing the bar course. My personal view, others may differ, is that an add-on LLM doesn't add an awful lot to the sort of chambers that require a master's degree. An independent master's from a good university is a far better option. That's something that can be considered another time. Let me just say, because I'm just about to move on to applications, a little bit more detail, even though we don't have much time. Look at all. I will be doing another webinar, in fact, this time next week, on the application process, and I'll be looking at fees and funding during that. So please feel free to attend. That webinar, just as this one, will be recorded and will be available from our website. So on the ICCA Bar Course events page. So you can go back and have a look at that. But we also run a bursary scheme that's funded, that we're going to have multiple of these, but the one we've got at the moment is funded by the Chancery Bar Association. You can get up to £10,000 off your fees. Please have a look at that. There are T's and C's and certain criteria that apply to that. Because I don't have much time, I'm not going to go further into that. But please have a look. We're doing what we can. What we don't have is because we're a not-for-profit organisation, we do not have our own specific scholarship fund, because essentially the only way we could get that would be by taking it from the fees for other students, and we prefer to keep it as low for all students as we possibly can. That's why we take that particular approach. What does it mean to you to actually pass this bar course? Well, first of all, you will get a postgraduate diploma in bar training from King's College London. Why King's College London? Well, your transcript will have our name on it, King's College London, because we as a college of bar training, we actually aren't a university in our own right. We buddy up, as it were, with King's College London, a really high quality university who oversees the academics, if you like, of our programme and provides you with that qualification. You will be able to be called to the bar of England and Wales, provided, of course, you do what are called qualifying sessions. You've got to do 10 of those. And you also will need to pass what's called a fit and proper person test of your inn. And of course, once you've done this course, you'll be able to start, as long as you secure pupillage, you'll be able to start pupillage. So that's what this course leads to. That's the fundamental that's the fundamental process. In terms of applications, you'll be delighted to hear that applications are now open. They're open till the 15th of January. I said I was going to go to this, and I appreciate there's not much time, but what we're looking for are students who are motivated, who are dedicated, and who are enthusiastic. And let me tell you why. Number one, because we want you to do really well. We want to have people who we believe actually really have the capacity to get pupillage and move through the profession into successful barristers and, of course, the judges of the future. But on the course, you've heard from Patrick about the very small groups that we teach in. And we think you deserve to go into a group where the other people in the room with you have the same level of motivation as you do. And therefore, it's really important And that's why we take a selective approach. That actually we have people who are like-minded at that particular level, but not necessarily at other levels, because we want as diverse and supportive a community as we can have, which is why we have a fair admissions policy, which means we don't take into account your school, your university, or indeed your protected characteristics. But more about that next week. Is there a question popping up that I need to answer, or are we okay for the moment?
I was just going to type a response to that, Chris, because it's just saying that it's blind admission screening. So does this mean I'm not allowed to reveal my identity related information in my essays? I think they mean the response to the questions. I was just typing a quick response saying all references to schools and universities and any protected characteristics are removed from applications before they're scored.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. If there's something about in terms of your protected characteristics, for example, a disability that is really important for you to reveal as part of your application, then of course you must do so, and that wouldn't be redacted in those circumstances. Yeah. But again, I'll be looking at this in a lot more detail next week, so please don't feel that in some way you're being deprived of information here. Have a look also on the application process page of our website, because we put a lot of detail into that in terms of what the application process is all about. That really brings me to the final part of this. Other events that we're doing. I've mentioned the webinar next week. We've got webinars on advocacy skills. We've got a webinar on pupillage. You can sign up from the events page, ICCA Bar Course, the ICCA Bar Course events. Go onto the Bar Course page of our website, drop down menu, you'll see events there. You can sign up to all of our webinars from there. The open day, come along. If you're thinking of bar training in 2024 or 2025, come along to Gray's Inn Hall on the Saturday, the 11th of November, starting at 10, finishing at 1. You can meet our tutors. We'll take you through in more detail than we've had the opportunity to do today, exactly what you can look forward to on the ICCA Bar Course. And when you've finished at 1 o'clock, you can have a wonderful afternoon in Covent Garden or look around the inn. Yeah, you can take your time and actually really take in what it's all about. There's much further useful information available. All of that is available on our website, including a guide I've written from a neutral perspective, I promise, on bar training. So I really hope that all of this information can assist you and to make the right decision. But we really want you to feel that you can get to know us before you choose where to do your bar training. It's only right, as I say, that you look around at all training providers. That's what I think any responsible organisation would do. And then if you decide that we would be right for you, we would be absolutely delighted to accept and see your application. And I think that brings us 2 minutes after time, which I can promise you for me is actually pretty good, because I can be asked very simple questions and spend 25 minutes answering them. So I'd like to say goodbye. I don't want to sound like the two Ronnies here. Goodbye from me, Chris Kessling, Vice-Dean of the ICCA, to Jane and Patrick, our directors of online learning, and a very special thanks to Rachel for your first webinar. You've been extraordinarily helpful, and thank you finally, of course, to all of you for attending today. I hope it's been very helpful. Remember, you can get the recording from the website from tomorrow or thereabouts, and thank you again. All the best. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.